Welcome back to another segment of the Grassy Knoll. This will be playing this final week in November. I guess that would be the 26th. We have with us today Neil Kramer. You've heard him on a couple of times. He is up on my favorite links of favorite blogspot sites. With the Cleaver.blogspot.com. Again, as I've said, you've heard him before, and he's joining us today from the UK, which, as everybody knows, is our motherland here in the United States. So how you doing, Neil?
I'm doing very well. How are you doing?
All right, it's good. It's good to talk to you. Every so often you drop in via email, and it's good to hear from you. This last one, though, I obviously wanted to grab you before you went too far and say, listen, if we were going to do this again, let's do it again, and let's do it soon. So, anyway.
Okay, yeah, no, that's much appreciated. It's a pleasure to be on.
All right. So what's on your mind these days?
All kinds of things.
Yeah, okay. Now, remember, this is a family show. So.
Yeah, I mean, a lot's happened since the last time I spoke to you, which I think was at the kind of beginning of this year. And, you know, now we're kind of looking at Christmas just around the corner, and happy Thanksgiving to all you guys, by the way. I believe that's just shortly being yesterday, was it?
Yeah. As I'll tell the people I'm recording this the Friday after Thanksgiving.
Yes.
And I'll tell you this.
Just to confuse people.
Yeah, right. Well, you know, I don't want to be disingenuous with them. But then again, you know, there's a certain continuity when this is going to be played during the week of the 26th to refer to Thanksgiving as fully in the past. But I'm going to say this so you folks in the UK understand this about the Yanks. And I always remind people about this is the greatest holiday of the year. And there's 3 reasons why. It's all about food. You get 4 days off. And Santa keeps his fat ass out of it. So, and I'm telling you, there are no expectations. There's no returning food, you know, at the store. You know, so I love this. Well, all these people are out since midnight tonight, shopping and getting themselves in bigger debt for crap they don't need, and buying it with money they don't have.
Well, you sound very much like George Carlin there, Viz.
Well, that's exactly where I'm going. And I tell you, when he says it, you know, stuff they don't need.
With money they don't have.
The other one I like is when he says, and I run this a lot in places where I don't drop in much on blogs, but I'm in this health email group, and I've just, somebody, you know, they're doing this Ron Paul thing. I'm going, folks, forget about it. And, of course, they all turned on me with this rabidity, so I go back and forth with them. But the one line from Carlin, I quote him, you know, it's like, it's a big club, and you ain't in it.
Yeah. Well, that's a great video. I must link that up. People haven't seen it.
And, you know, I mean, he never really showed, and you don't know when he finally got it. And you didn't really hear, you know, and then all of a sudden he came out with that clip, and someone says, you know, you might want to check this out. I mean, I embraced it like I play it like every week. So.
Yeah. Well, it's very interesting because, I mean, my first view, if you like, of an alternative set of rules and realities was not from anybody particularly profound in terms of literary or academic skill, but was from a comedian, which was Bill Hicks.
Yeah.
And he, you know, when I just thought he was great, and there's an article on my blog site, you know, covering what I felt about him and what he knew. And then a few years later, I discovered sort of George Carlin as well. I just found it particularly, ironic that some of the closest truths delivered in the sort of snappiest ways was coming through in, you know, a comedic performance. And I think that's, you know, in retrospect, that's probably one of the only ways that you can deliver some of this information, because otherwise, as we've heard from, you know, yourself and many of your guests, if you begin to, you know, confront people with just pure information, their eyes glaze over and they think, look, you might be right, but I don't want to know. It's very, very uncomfortable what you're saying, and it would mean a total, you know, rethinking from scratch, so just shut up. So if you're doing it in a comedic performance, people are prepared to, you know, give you a platform for it. And I think Hicks and Carlin knew that. So they used that actually to deliver some of the most, you know, important information the audience has probably ever heard. So I don't know what they do afterwards, how they process that or ditch it, but at least it's been presented to them.
The one thing I was wondering about, I'm afraid I would be right in this, and that is entertainment, performance in general, are, and for good reason, a stereotype holds, and that is they are seen as being liberal or Democrat. And when he was given that shtick, and everybody was yahooing it up, I'm saying to myself, probably most of these people are anti-Republicans, and they think it's all about Bush, when in essence it's about the nature of government and those who, quote, serve. You know, and so I sat there and going, folks, I mean, you're laughing, but first of all, you are victims of what he's telling you. And secondly, this ain't about Bush. This is about the way things are.
No, I think that's a pretty fundamental step that, you know, Ron Paul, he looks like a nice guy. He's a credible candidate if that is your belief system. But when you move to the side of that, you know, there's nothing he can do. And anyone who, you know, goes too far, and I was kind of, you know, I think we had a little email exchange with one or two of your guys talking about, who was it, Chavez, who was saying, you know, is this the guy who's kind of bucking the system and saying, you know, I'm going to do it my way, America, you're garbage, and, you know, we'll look after our own resources and do our own thing? Or is this another guy just playing another role, which I think you have to assume that, and you do come to that conclusion when you look at the data, even though, you know, there's a little piece of us in the back of our minds, you know, the remnants of the innocent world that think it would be nice if the system did work and it could be brought back. But I think, you know, particularly when you look at, I mean, this is a sensitive issue over in your neck of the woods, but, you know, the founding fathers were not the people we thought they were, and they weren't as, you know, as well-intended as we thought they were, and they were all belonging to, you know, certain societies, and they all had certain, you know, hidden agendas.
Sure.
And I think if you take it from that basis, America has been a colony or an outpost for other forces, whether they be UK, you know, blue blood or dragon blood or Jesuit forces, whatever you think. The US are the stormtroopers and the, you know, the experimental society of
the New World,
you know, Illuminati forces, and you need to do the groundwork to be able to sum it up like that, because if you just came out with that statement, you know, you'd be stoned probably.
Yeah, and not only stoned by those who have no idea about the way things really are. One of the most, as I've said, and I don't mean to keep beating it over the head, but I mean, I can't get around it either. It's this big elephant sitting in the middle of the road. And that is, even those who get it and understand the nature of how information was bought out in the United States by the foundations, and those foundations are started by the robber baron families early in the 20th century, actually started in the late 19th century. It's that they spun the information, and folks who get it know that, but then they still cleave, excuse the pun, to the notion and the nice Christmas fairy tale story of the founding fathers being, and you know, and they're portrayed both pictorially and bibliographically as being almost demigods, like they had this like heavenly, ethereal, above it all, but we really love the little guy type of nature. And the freaking guys were lawyers and bankers and slavers.
Yeah, I think that represents a deep human need to have, you know, once you grow away from your family, you know, and you get to the age where you go out and work and stuff, there's an innate need to replace the paternal influences with an outside one, and the best one in an open and free society might be local and federal and national representatives and so on. And so you seek somebody who is looking after things, and you seek some sort of you know, higher force where you can have that belief that there is a father looking over us, you know, outside of the spiritual realm. I mean, just purely in the human realm. So if that isn't the case, and if even the founding fathers weren't interested in the people and didn't give a, you know, two hoots about them, then what? And that's the problem. That is the, you know, the gap, the chasm where you approach people with information, and the blank stare back is saying, well, don't show me a chasm, and then don't, you know, feel that there's a way over that for me. You have to show someone the chasm and say, look, this isn't the way you thought it was. We're on the other side. But there are ways to get over, and here are some techniques to do it. Just showing someone this huge, you know, divergence between two streams of thought is not going to help them. They will not take that step. So a lot of my thinking, you know, particularly over the last few years, has been geared towards, you know, don't bang on about the problem all the time. Don't, you know, continuously lay out this massive, sort of 2,000-year unfolding, help people actually do something about it. Given there's some sort of tools to say, well, there is another way to gain some independence. And, referring back to popular culture, the 60s TV show The Prisoner with Patrick McGoohan.
Yep.
I think there's some amazing lines in that. I think you played a clip I sent you ages ago. I think it might have been the Collins brothers who were checking that out with you.
Yes, I did play.
And there's some amazing lines in it, but one prevailing theme is that McGoohan's character, number 6, he kind of puts across the idea, he says, well, I may be in an enclosed society where there is no ultimate freedom, but I'm free in my mind and I'm free in my actions, within this place. So freedom, first and foremost, is an attitude. It's not something you go out and storm the gates with because you'll just get blown away. So, although people like Alex Jones does a lot to spread the first level of information, he, consistently fails to deliver the second level of information. And if the first bit ends in fear, then, he's creating, it's a nice marketing tool. I'm sure that I would hope that that's not all he's trying to do. But fear is the biggest turn-off ever to people. So, as an alternative, you say, well, here's an ugly truth, but here's a road past it, So if you can't deliver both, then I just don't want to hear from those people.
Victor Thorne is on this series of shows with Lisa Giuliani were Wing TV. And, Victor was kind of giving us a little, I guess you would say, postscript since they left and I'm leaving. But, and he was saying you got to create your own reality to a certain extent. And it's funny because I was watching...
very much so, yeah.
Well, and I was watching Shirley MacLaine. She's going around, she's pounding her new book, the actress who's always been, like new agey, and that's fine. But she was saying you got to create your own reality. And, Neil, where I go with it, it's like, I do believe in the Christian schema, and I do believe that if you're going to be enslaved, to a certain extent, you've got to find something inside of that gives you some kind of reason to live every day. If you go too deep, then you kind of get Gnostic, and I mean, as a lot of people, will relate or will find some comfort in that. I don't, but I was thinking something, and I don't mean to get on a digression here, but I would say that I paid the price for telling people there's no way out on this earth, but that's another day. But I will say, I was thinking about, there was a movie with Robin Williams set in World War II, and they were in a prison camp. Well, actually, it was a concentration camp. Do you remember this?
Yeah, I think I know what you're talking about.
And he was like, he kept everybody's hopes up. He would keep talking about radio transmissions he heard.
Yeah.
And the victorious Russian army will soon be here. And it wasn't.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
And
another one you mean, yeah.
Yeah. And I'm like, I understand that. And it's hard for me to argue against it. But I probably would have looked at Robin Williams and said, Robin, come here, on the side. Dude, ain't happening. You know it. And he's like, yeah, but don't tell anybody. and I mean, that's the way I feel. But I mean, the thing is, I'm not a morbid, lugubrious person who walks around going, we're doomed and all this other stuff. I have fixed what I believe is the truth. It doesn't look real good for humankind. But, I mean... Well, go ahead.
I mean, what I'd like to do is put forward a proposition for what I think is occurring on a physical, non-physical level. And I'd also like to put forward a means of dealing with that.
Okay.
So, what I'd like to do is just kind of lay down a couple of ideas that I think explain a lot of what's going on, because, I don't think it's a polarity of, are things going to be terrible or not? Am I going to live through it or not? I don't think it's going to work like that. I don't think it is meant to work like that. And I think, to some extent, thinking that, we can turn this round and, we've got the NWO on the run, do that. So, that's not a way forward, The people who are controlling this reality are not doing it from a position of might or ignorance. They're doing it from a position of intense, profound knowledge. And that extends further than political intrigue. It extends into, all areas of sort of existence. So, you can't beat that. You know, they are steering this to a certain event. But I just want to lay down an idea that it's kind of an old. I think he was a psychologist who was an American guy called Abraham Maslow, and he was working in the sort of 30s, 40s, and 50s. And he died in 1970, I believe, or thereabouts. And he established the thing he's remembered for is this thing called Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And it's basically a description of what human beings need to exist and what they need to develop themselves to a point of fulfillment. And just very briefly, there's sort of 5 stages to that. And if you imagine this as a pyramid, and we'll use it for our own purposes for a change.
Oh, no, not a pyramid.
Well, this is a happy pyramid.
It's a happy pyramid.
The bottom level is physiological needs. So your basic needs such as food, water, sleep, shelter, etc. And without those, you can't begin to think about finer things or education or anything. Those are basic things. The layer on top of that is kind of safety stroke security. So that's employment, resources, family, property, whatever means of security it is. So if you live in the West, those are the things. If you live in an indigenous culture or in a jungle or in a desert, those things would be different. They would be, animals, tents, huts, gardens, agriculture, etc. The next level up is love and belonging, which I think, was a key thing in the sort of 50s that he identified without friendship and family and, physical and sexual intimacy, it is difficult to move beyond that. So I think those are the things that most people seek. So those are the first 3. So physiological basics, safety, and love and belonging. Once those things are kind of in place, and, we would hope that we can all, tick those boxes and say, well, I have elements of those, and sometimes not all the time, but, generally I have those things. Then the next level up is what he referred to as esteem, which is, confidence and achievement and respect and so on. So, those are the things that you would seek to have some sort of sense of integrity in self. And at the very top of the pyramid, the last one, is what he calls self-actualization, which is, an integration of all those things and to become a really complete being, to be, at one with yourself, at one with God, at one with the planet, at one with your, with your lot. And to be in your life and to be centered and grounded and fulfilled. And that was his model, this hierarchy of needs that is expressed in this pyramid. So he felt that without those things in that order, and the order is important, you cannot proceed to self-actualization. Okay, what I believe is happening is that using a model similar to this, although probably more sophisticated, the system, let's call it the system rather than giving it, Illuminati or NWO or whatever, the system is putting in place apparatus to keep us midway down that pyramid. So it's saying, okay, we're going to feed you, we're going to give you money, we're going to give you sex, we're going to give you entertainment, but that's it, and that's all you get. Mm-hmm. And any ideas of integrity or self-actualization or fulfillment are just dreams. You will never get them. They're not important. They don't mean anything. They have no value. So what they're effectively doing is, and this is represented well with the pyramid with the capstone absent, is they are chopping off the top section. They're saying self-actualization is gone. In the society, we are not giving it you because, 1, you don't deserve it. 2, you're not capable of doing it. But most importantly, if the populace had that, they would be ungovernable and uncontrollable. Okay? Mm-hmm. So this kind of kneecapping, if you like, is a purposeful desire to say, once those people are in that situation, we can control them. If somebody is unfulfilled and kind of unhappy and, reliant on our resources, then we can control them. So it's stopping that process occurring. One big technique, and this is reflected in if you're, a common listener to the Grassy Knoll, and if you go each week and download the MP3s and listen to them, one of the themes that consistently crops up is that of media manipulation and message manipulation, predictive programming, and so on and so forth. And I think you've got many guests who go into that, right?
Mm-hmm. And let me just say this too, and this is just a quick aside. What was interesting also, and it was really edifying to be in this position, and that a lot of these folks who have come on the show to speak to this, and I'll give you an example. Yeah, you have your Collins brothers, also Chris Knowles, and other folks. They were coming to the same conclusions or had followed information trails that all led them to the same thinking, unbeknownst to one another, and that's something I think that's really needed, because you need, I think, confirmation from, shall we say, independent sources that what we're seeing is...
It's important, because otherwise you can end up going on a bit of a side road or, off-road journey, but if other people are coming to the same conclusion and the people of intelligence and integrity, yes, it helps to consolidate that view.
All right, so I'm sorry to interrupt. Go ahead, Neil.
Oh, that's okay, yeah. You might have to interrupt me so I don't go off on a bit of a monologue. But,
all right, trust me.
Yeah, okay, so I've been very interested in the idea of predictive programming. But one problem I had with it was I couldn't initially determine whether it was, A, they were saying, this is what we're going to do to you, aren't you stupid, and isn't this funny? Or B, they were going to say, this is what we're going to do to you, and we will plant the idea in your mind, so when these things come to pass, you won't be so freaked out, or, there will already be some level of acceptance.
Conditioning, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And when I was considering these things, depending on the format of the programming I use, is it TV, is it film, is it magazine, is it discussion, fashion, whatever, I couldn't quite figure out that either of those two were the right end of the right end result for these people. So I thought, no, that doesn't quite seem the thing that they want to achieve. So it led me to a slightly more kind of metaphysical level, which I felt they were basically putting out what I think famous atheist Richard Dawkins, who I call the zookeeper, because that's what he is, a zoologist, in actual fact. So the zookeeper came up with this word meme, M-E-M-E, in about 1975-76, and he used it as a means of describing a sort of unit of information that behaves in a similar way to a gene, so hence the sort of the similarity in the word. And what he was trying to explain with this thing was that a meme is, a culturally sort of significant unit which can be transmitted between one person and another, or one party and another, one agency and another. And so, as time's gone by, this kind of idea of the meme has been picked up again in the sort of 21st century, and it has been recognised as a key tool that the system uses to undermine the process of self-actualization. And like a virus, a meme, it's debatable whether it has any sort of independent existence or not, any life characteristics. Some may say yes, some may say no. But they basically form networks whereby information can be transferred from one host to another. So in that sense, it is very much like a virus. And he even put forward the idea that these things can work together to form kind of multiple memes, which he called memeplexes, okay? So a meme, a good example of a meme, I'll give you a very, very recent example here in the UK. This was just from a few days ago. I think it was November the 21st. One of our kind of quality newspapers over here is called The Guardian. It's kind of slightly left-wing newspaper, but the high quality, been around for a long time. And the language and the literacy and the reporting is usually pretty credible. Mm-hmm. This particular article, though, kind of dropped all that through the floor, and this is a very good example of a meme. The title of the article was "School Massacre Plots Hatched on Internet." Okay, so that's the header, the title. The kind of sub is German school closed after chat room alerts. Columbine killings inspire copycat conspiracies. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So the way the meme works is, the actual language itself and the structure and the syntax is unimportant. Memes work by keyword association. So the words here, we've got massacre, plot, hatched, internet, school, chat room, killings, copycat, conspiracy. So that is the meme. The meme is that collection of words, okay? The actual news item is actually that a school was shut down after a tip-off because they were worried that the kids were up to something, okay? Now that is a very, very different set of emotional responses and a very different set of information from how it's actually pitched from the newspaper. So that meme is definitely being transferred in a definite form for a definite purpose. So that's what differentiates a meme from an idea or just a regular piece of information. It has a defined purpose. It's created and then booted out of the door and sent on its way to do its job. So I propose that the meme is one of the key methods of capping that process and stopping people to be able to move forward. And you can see these things everywhere and in every level of society, particularly in news reporting and particularly in film and TV. So the meme itself carries the information, but it also carries an end result, which is usually a response that is designed to be elicited, such as dread or anxiety, those being, I would estimate, the two most common. So I did a kind of little project in the summer, which was I monitored CNN website, which wasn't a pleasant thing to do in and of itself, because it was such low-grade, low-quality stuff that it was just difficult to believe that this was a key mainstream source anywhere.
Yep.
And what I did was I extracted, if you look on the website, there's kind of half a dozen headlines at any one time over to sort of towards the top left. And I extracted those headlines every day. And I just put them in a document and did this for a couple of months to see if there was any commonality and any pattern and any theme, and if I could detect any, memes in there. And I mean, I can kind of, evidence this with some documentation, but the bottom line was that I would say 92 to 95% of the language was to do with violence and death and murder. And the structure of all the articles beneath those headlines was one of dread, basically, and of anticipation and anxiety. So it's like, this has happened. It might get better, but we think it's going to get worse.
Mm-hmm.
So the meme is, if you watch the news is literally a dreadful experience. It is full of dread. And that is the point of it. And there was no balance at all. There was no kind of judgment. There was no independence. It was simply, it was like being sat and trapped with a sort of skeptical guy at a bar for 3 hours where you can't get away, and he's just telling you one dreadful, horrible, negative, gloomy story after another. And he's just splurging it all out. And then by the time you leave and you say, listen, I've got to go, and it's midnight, you walk out of the bar and you feel, like you've just done sort of 8 hours, hard labor. And you're drained of energy. The world is shit, you don't want to do anything. You just want to go to sleep and just switch off. And I would say that is a very, firm metaphor or analogy for what I'm talking about.
Yep. Oh, I agree. You want me to
So it's certainly something that can be observed, and I think that most people listening to this will just be nodding, going, yeah, we know.
Oh, yeah, well, I mean, I'm thinking when you were speaking about how the proles are depicted by Orwell, and when you just were saying that, that's what I was thinking,
Yeah.
It was the case. And just
that's right, yeah, very much, I know exactly what you mean.
And another thing, too, and you touched upon this a while back, and like I said, I'm not going to stop you from where you're headed, but that thing about two things, Brave New World. When we read it in high school back in the late 60s, we were told it was a dark satire. In fact, it is not. That's what Huxley saw for us who will do the wet work and will be made to love our servitude, a nice little idiom he coined. And also, like you were saying, George Bernard Shaw, Intelligent Women's Guide to Socialism, in which he says in the epilogue, you remember that?
Just gotta love that title.
Yeah, I mean, like, what's that about? Yeah, it was like Women's Wear It Daily. I can't figure that one out either. But yeah, in that, but you know, I tell you what, I mean, he was glib, he was clever, but he also was an elitist, and I even believe the title of that book is kind of a slap. You know what I mean? But since he's considered an intellectual, he was allowed to get away with it. But don't forget, in that epilogue, you know, he writes, you're going to be forcibly fed, clothed, housed, and put to work. And if you did not have, you know, the industry more or less to live with that kind of life, you could be executed in a kindly manner.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, and so
and the fiction and the fact of that is irrelevant. Yes. The information is there, and it becomes a reality.
Right. So, I mean, as you were going along talking about the pyramid of needs, and let me ask you one other thing. But don't you find it interesting? And maybe you don't. But here, as you were saying, here in the United States, people are kept from what you would call self-actualization, or at least breaking free and being, you know what I mean, being free in a society that keeps them somewhat in chains, but they're the ones who clamp the manacles on their wrists. And just as we started off kidding about what Christmas is going to do to personal economies, which are already deeply in debt, and they're going to go out and get further in debt. Right now,
absolutely,
yeah. So in other words, in the United States, in a land of plenty, people are still are bogged down with what they consider, and wrongly so, basic necessities for life.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that can be partially explained by if we take a look back at that pyramid. I mean, you know, by all means, people go and take a look at, you know, Google and type it in. You'll see plenty of images and, you know, layouts of that. So you can, it's a good thing to sort of just imprint in your head. The sort of stage in the middle is esteem, and I think what the system does is it associates esteem with material things.
Mm-hmm.
So a successful life is a big house and a big car and lots of money, and that's esteem. So I think people who cling on, who, you know, are like desperate to maintain this apparatus even though it is dark and destructive, the reason they do it is because that their self-esteem is bound up in that very framework. And so to dismantle that would be to dismantle their entire psyche. I just don't think it's a viable thing to do. It's incredibly clever and incredibly effective technique to bind esteem to material things, or, you know, let's at least say things of, you know, shallow value, like going out and getting drunk and, you know, taking someone home and blah, blah, blah. You know, those are considered, you know, a real fantastic night or an amazing thing to do. So if you bind esteem at that level in the youth, and then at the top level of, you know, the sort of 35 to 50-year-olds who are seeking to amass wealth, their esteem is bound to the things they have, then you will fight to hold on to those, even though you feel deep down there is some little kernel left in you that says, this doesn't mean anything, these aren't things of inherent value. Nevertheless, they will do it to protect the psyche, because the psyche is an incredibly, survivalist entity. It will do anything to protect itself. The ego will stop at nothing to protect itself. Even, you know, the delusional behavior, compartmentalization, multiple personality, schizophrenia, you know, are techniques the ego can use to protect itself when it feels under threat. So, you know, people who are doing this thing are very clever. They know this better than anyone does. And they use these techniques and their understanding of, neurolinguistics, and, you know, anything to do with brain and mind, psychology, is sensational level of information they have that is not available in the public domain. And these techniques are incredibly effective. What I kind of said at the beginning was that I wanted to, propose a model where there is a description of what's going on, which I think I've to some extent done. And I also want to propose an alternative way of thinking about this, because their chosen description is not the only one available. There is another one. In my sort of youth, I read a book by a guy called Jean Gebser, who was a sort of German sort of philosopher, ponderer, I think he was also a poet and stuff as well, and a linguist. Sort of clever guy, and he was born in Germany, and kind of as the fascist regime rose, he decided that it was time for him to leave. So he went further into Europe to Italy and France, and then he moved to Spain, and he got involved in the sort of Spanish Ministry of Education and the Spanish Civil War, in fact. In the end, he sort of went to Switzerland at Bern, and he stayed there and wrote there. So that's the little sketch of this guy. So he got around a bit. He was a very clever guy, and he had a very deep sense of injustice at what he was seeing around him, particularly kind of being booted out of your own country because of a ridiculous political system. So he turned his brilliance away from art and poetry, which is where it began, to examining the idea of consciousness, because he thought, how can this system work, and how can this system of fascism and dictatorship be so effective in these times, and why are people buying into it, which obviously is a pertinent question to us now, 50, 60 years later. And what he basically said was that he said consciousness is an evolving process that evolves almost as an entity in itself over millennia throughout, history. And each stage of consciousness can be considered as, a key developmental cycle. And he broke it down into a number of stages: the archaic consciousness structure, the magical consciousness structure, the mythical, the mental, and the integral. So there is a parallel here between what Maslow was saying about this hierarchy and what this guy's saying about consciousness. And he said that the archaic structure is essentially, people who have very, very sort of base beliefs in sun worship, in moon worship, in pantheism, and so on and so forth. And it is basically, man and nature kind of working together, either in reverence or in fear or in harmony, depending on where you are. The magical structure was on top of that, as intelligence began to grow in the Homo sapien. The magical structure added to that, and it added, some sort of logic and occultism. And then, as that occultism grew, it began to separate out into pagan beliefs and into organized beliefs, and then, things were dropped that were obviously nonsense, and other things were retained. And then the mythical structure that followed that was, again, a refinement of that process, whereby the systems were more carefully distilled and evolved. And, many of the sort of religions we see today come from that mythical consciousness structure. And what Gebser kind of came to the conclusion of was that in what he saw around him in sort of fascist Germany in the late 40s and 50s, as the movement started to grow, he felt that the mental structure, which was the age that we've been in for, most of our recorded history, for certainly the last 2,000-3,000 years, has come to an end. So the mental, rational structure that we're now in is basically kind of grinding to a halt. It doesn't work anymore. And every time this occurs, there is a similar kind of catastrophism, as most people look at it. And some people say that these events are marked by huge apocalyptic incidents. And other people say it is a consciousness shift, that basically people say, we don't want to do it this way anymore. We don't want to pay these bills. We don't want to go to school. This is rubbish. No one's enjoying themselves. It's just crap. We don't like this anymore. We're going to do something different. And as that occurs, the systems fall, and inevitable period of chaos comes about. As ever, the system is aware of this model, and they try to manage the stages in between. So they capitalize on the chaotic states between the shift from one consciousness structure to another by predicting what the next one is and being aware of what the next one is, rather. And they can exploit the shift in the middle. A good example, for example, is in South America, when the Spanish came over, the shamans, some of them would stand on the edge of the shore and I'm sure everyone's heard this story, and they could not see the ships because the shamans were still in the mythical structure of consciousness, and the Spanish who came over were very definitely in the mental rational structure. And so that is an indication of how deeply this model affects perception itself. And the shamans sent the traders and the ambassadors of the society down to the shore to greet the visitors. And as they put their hands out to greet them, the Spanish cut the hands off with swords. And that is capitalization of a change in consciousness structure. So Gibbs has said that as the mental rational declines, we move into another one, the final one, which is an integral change. So my proposition is this, that what we see before us now in these final years, and we are in the end times, make no mistake about that. We know that inside ourselves, all of us. In these end days, we're moving from the mental rational structure to the integral structure. This guy has not got it pinned down, but it's a nice way of describing it. Mm-hmm. So this paradigm shift happens on every level. The unfortunate aspect to this is that our system is seeking to control that transition. They know it's coming. They're not making it happen. It's happening in and of itself. What they're wanting to do is control the transitional process, which I personally believe is not doable. However, when you see the concentration camps and the train tracks and the surveillance system that's been set up and the banking systems and the fake wars and all the rest of it, what you're seeing is the tools of control for that phase shift. That's what they're doing. That's what they're trying to do, and they're trying to control it. And I think that many prophecies and many revelations, the revelation of St. John, is a description of this change, of this process. That is what he's talking about. In the integral stage, integral structure change, man can basically go home. You know, if you are that way inclined, you can go back to the Father. If you are not that way inclined, you go to, you know, what your belief system shepherds you towards. But there is an integrity in this, and without integrity, you will remain in the mental structure, which will basically be a hell on earth. So I felt for a long time that probably around 2012, a lot of things lay this out quite well for me, and from different aspects as well. So for people like Terence McKenna, who was a sort of ethnobotanist and psychedelic explorer, but a very, very, very profound mind. And anybody who wants to check him out, please go and have a look at his talks and listen to the things that have been podcast of him. He proposed an idea of a time wave that ended in 2012, where all creativity becomes a singularity at that point. So that is another means of describing integration. And then, of course, the Mayans and the Hopi said it is the end of an age, it is the end of this time, literally. And that does not mean the end of the world and the cessation of things and the snuffing out of life. It means it is the end of this time, the end of this time before a new one. So it helps, as you were indicating before, to say, okay, let's look at some people, 6 or 7 people of integrity who are describing this process. And as you do it, though, they use different words, different terminology, different, spiritual levels within that. To me, they're all saying the same thing, which is there is a shift coming, and it is a profound shift that will change everything. And it is the end of what we know. Me, for one, I think good. I'm glad. I'm tired of this. And okay, I don't really want to sit in a hut with a shotgun and 500 cans of beans either. But no, your integrity is your ticket through to the other side of that. So if you have a certain strength and if you have a spiritual connection, those are the things you need. Without that, the clinger-oners, the people who are determined to hold on to this materialist mental state will suffer. They're not going to have a nice time. It's not going to be very pleasant. So my suggestion to people who are on the edge of that, because I'm sure in our friends and families we all know people like that. They're not bad people. They are fearful people. The best thing to do is to introduce them to one of these models that is most suited to who they are. So if they're an academic type thinking person, give them the Gebser book, which is like, weighs about sort of 3 kilograms or something. if they are a New Agey person, switching to Terence McKenna. He's a peaceful, harmonious guy. He has no religious connection, so where that's a turn-off for some, he is beneficial. And that is a method that I will use, although I do wait for an indication. I don't want to go out there and preach to people. Those days are so long gone, because it's an entirely futile exercise. What is a far more effective way of proceeding is to wait for those indications from people, where they look at you a second longer after you finish saying something, and it's their way of saying, I want more on this, but I don't know how to ask for it, and don't make me feel stupid, please. Mm-hmm. So it's very easy to say, well, it's quite interesting. Listen, I've got a book. Let me give you that book and read it, see what you think. It's quite a casual thing, but I feel that when they get that book home, they will kind of seek answers in it, because there are no answers from anywhere else. And if you were late to the idea of, personal sort of transcendence in your life, it's difficult to know where to begin. So I think people, some people like to know how the process has been implemented. So, the I-Man and people like that can provide you with, academic level detail to say, this is how the scam works. The physical material scam is based on finance. That's the control. But for me, that would be a turn-off, because I'm kind of like, numerically challenged, shall we say.
Oh, yeah, I am too.
I don't think I'd get very far with that. But that's what I want to put forward, that going back to what you were saying earlier, Viz, I've finished on this piece now, but going back to what you were saying earlier, I personally believe that this change, this apocalypse, which if you look in the sort of Oxford dictionaries, it means revelation. It does not necessarily mean end of the world. That's more recent interpretation of that word. This apocalypse is upon us. It is coming, but I'm thinking of I'm putting a book together at the moment, and I'm thinking of calling it "The Apocalypse is not the end of the world." The apocalypse is coming, but it's not the end of the world.
Yeah, well, you're right.
So that's my message, basically. So those two sort of parallel lines of thought, if you compare them next to each other, you can understand what's going on. It makes sense of what you see through your TV screen. It makes it easier to understand. As other speakers say, you once you know the coordinates, you're more able to determine what's going on. You're still watching the same thing, but you can sense the meaning behind it and the purpose of it. So to some degree, the system is as scared as everyone else. It's just that they aim to capitalize on the transition. So that's what we see before us at the moment, and that's what I think virtually every single person who appears on your show is describing some aspect of that, whether it's media or vaccinations or health or Masonic influence or Jesuit influence. Those are all pieces in the jigsaw. What I try to do as best I can in my own, limited amateur way is step back and look at that whole piece and try and figure out, well, what is the picture of? What does that mean? Where are we? So I think as well as analysing the detail, it is a wise move to be able to step back and see the whole sort of mosaic and understand what that means. And there's a certain amount of comfort in that.
Let's do this too, because we haven't before. And I'm not going to chase you away necessarily at the 60th minute. But your website is thecleaver.blogspot.com. It can be hit from my website for the time being. Now, with what you just addressed, have you done anything on the website, prose-wise, like I said, with regard to what you just spoke about?
Yes. There's sort of two or three pieces. There's a recent one, which I think is called, let me just take a look, which I think is called Seeding Human Consciousness, which is actually, I'm using an analogy of Aboriginal Australian thought, or Ananu thought as they're called, and their version of what the society believes is reality and what is outside of that are two separate things, which is a good tool for thinking about what we face. And there's another thing on there called Unplugging the Matrix, which, again, kind of discusses more at a metaphysical level how profound the control of the reality is. both sort of linguistically and consciousness-wise, etc. So you can track. I mean, this is really they're just snapshots of my thoughts. They're quite well accessed. I can, when I look at the stats on these things, it has been growing quite a lot happily over the last year. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people are reading this, and it's quite nice to see the variety of sites. They're not all conspiracy sites. They're not all, people who kind of are in a certain niche community. Science people are looking at this. Universities, students, people from all over the world are looking at it. So I think people are out there looking for answers, and mine and a million other sites may contain them, but what I try to do that's a little bit different is, to some degree, take a view on the whole thing, take an overview on it, just from one human's perspective. So you can trace those elements in the website, and there's a lot of stuff on there, and a lot of links to some of the things I've talked about are over there as well. So you can, go and check out some of the guys I've talked about, and some of the books that contain this information is up there. Okay. So, please have a look, and I hope there's something useful there that people can connect with.
Well, the one thing that I'm dealing with, I guess, over here, and maybe over there too. I mean, it's hard to say, and a lot of the way people respond to me, I guess, is the way they relate what's going on, or what I'm relating to their own lives, and that changes to the UK to some degree, to Australia, New Zealand, Europe, Canada, United States. I believe, obviously, like I said, I believe in Scripture and the Christian schema, and a lot of people will say, well, you guys are forcing this to come about, and that's another brainwash, too. There's guys like Robertson out there, who are warmongers and are aiding that certain view of Christianity, and rightly so, but they are not what it's about. However, most folks who get the pulpit via TV and networks and such are the ones who you can't trust. The ones you can trust are the voices coming out of the caves, because that's always the way it's kind of been. But
that's right. And I think that's why it's so interesting. I mean, I didn't even know what a blog was sort of 2 years ago. Someone said, it's kind of like a website, and you can stick things on there. It's pretty easy. So, my blog is really an experiment to say, this is the stuff I'm thinking. Is anyone else interested? Mm-hmm. And I was quite prepared for people to come back and say, no, you nutter, be quiet. But that hasn't been the case. People have said, yes, this is interesting. This is what I think. Go and look at this. If you like, what you're talking about here, go and check this guy out. So, for me, it's been a selfish task of learning for me. Mm-hmm. So my thoughts are on there, but the juiciest thing about the site is not what's on there, it's what people respond to me and say, go and check this out, go and read this, go and look at, this book from, sort of 100 years ago, things I would never have encountered. And I think that's the value of these networks that we create between ourselves, to be able to flow this information back into, because the internet's not going to be around too much longer. And it's good to be able to have, and I know you've been doing this for years, local copies of all your information. So do not rely on the fact that you're going to be able to fire up your PC and get on the net and go and grab that file from wherever. That may not always be available, so it's quite a nice idea to keep a little archive and stick them on CD or whatever.
Going back to some of the things you were saying also, and one of them is, for me, it's nice to have these electronic conveniences and communication conveniences. But one of the things I see myself doing, not knowing how much time I got left, is starting to pull the plugs on devices. And Victor's on this week talking about someone who was, just absolutely gushing over the fact that she had a cell phone where she could be contacted anywhere she was 24/7.
Yes, that's my idea of a nightmare, actually.
I know. And he said she looked, the communication. Well, it was almost like with this unblinking stare, like, isn't this good? I am so happy they can keep in touch with me for 24/7. It's like you don't get it, folks. I mean, if you got the internet, if you got a computer in the house, they're going to be looking in your back door. It doesn't matter what they say about legislation, man. They're looking at you, so just understand it.
Right, do what they want to do.
I mean, if you got a telephone, they're listening if they want to. With the cell phones, you don't need a chip, man. Everybody's walking.
Tell you that just before we spoke, you suggested I might share this with people. When I was last on the show, my email stopped working, and I couldn't send you my details, and we were kind of like a bit last minute actually getting this stuff arranged. The same thing again happened yesterday, and I've got like 3 email accounts, and just this particular one, which is the one I use to communicate with on all these subjects. So, there's not any sort of personal information in there. It ceased to function, and I couldn't actually get, communications over to you. And, this particular provider, I've got another account with them, and that works absolutely fine. The service there's not a problem at their end. There's not a problem on my PC, but the communication has been interrupted, and it made it difficult to get information over to you. Almost impossible. These things occur, and I'm not the paranoid type. If someone's going to blow my head off, then just do it. But I'm not that type of person. I'm not living in fear and, wearing a tinfoil hat and all the rest of it. I don't do that. I don't live like that. So, but nevertheless, these things occur, and, your mobile phone is a tracking device. It's nothing to do with giving you convenience to speak to people. It's a means of making you feel that you need to have one. So anyone who's part of the system can track you anywhere, at any time, whether your phone is switched on or off. The only way of disabling your phone is just to take the battery out, which I'd recommend everyone does every day. If you're not using it, take the battery out.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's a freaky thing. The technology's there. Say, okay, we'll give them the technology. Let's have, we'll have a little bit of fun with that. And then you become so dependent on it, of course, that when the grid is switched off, it's very difficult. It's difficult to travel, it's difficult to communicate, it's difficult to do everything. So I agree, and I think someone else mentioned this on another show, that it's a very good discipline to begin turning off the things and the elements in your life that you don't need. So if TV's crap and you don't enjoy it, stop watching it.
Mm-hmm.
If you're sick of email and you don't really like it, then don't use it. And gradually you gauge your reliance on the grid, in inverted commas, and what it means to you. And the further you can move away from it, the better, quite frankly, because when this transition comes, it will put you in a greater space of, empowerment. So you're not worrying about, where you're going to get your drink and food from. There is some there. You have some. Maybe you have a garden, or you're lucky enough to have a stream or a river or something, And if you can cater for that stuff, then everything else is, follows through from that. So it's a good idea to be thinking about those things, not as a survivalist, just as an independent human, So we have a guy over here on TV called Ray Mears, and he's like, he goes out into the jungle or the Arctic or the desert, and he teaches you how to live and, what the indigenous people do to eat and drink and stay warm and safe and so on. And I'm always very interested in that. And I always transpose it to an urban environment to think, I wonder how that would work in the middle of London or Manchester, So, Well, it's a strange one.
As you're starting to see now, folks want to take this from, I guess, the Christian sense, or if they want to just do it from a secular level, it all is the same in this sense that when you were talking about, and rightly so, it's... You have to have your basic needs met, or you're in deep sneakers right from the very beginning.
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
But what's happening now is those needs are being threatened. And I guess in a sense it doesn't matter whether it's organic or whether it's by manipulation. And I think it's by manipulation. But what people are going to start to see...
No question about it.
Right.
There is enough food on this earth to feed everyone all the time, free, and there always has been. But it is managed in such a way that reliance on resource, elicits this basic human fear response of, that base level of maybe something right down in the hierarchy that I don't have. And if I don't have that, I don't give a toss about anything else further up. I'm not bothered about esteem and self-actualization. I just want to eat,
Well, when they, in 73, when they faked the oil crisis, and I was going back to school after a 2-year break in college, I wasn't thinking the way I was then, now rather, but what I realized, and I've said this, I won't go through the whole 9 yards, but we had a gas shortage based on, petroleum shortage. And, of course, they took the initiative to raise the price through the roof, which is probably the largest hike they've ever had, including what's going on right now. And the thing is, we saw tankers lining up in the bay, because I went to school in New Jersey, and we were at the head of Newark Bay, where there were refineries, and we started seeing tankers lining up, and we're going, they're lining up and they're not offloading? What's going on? And then I'm like, well, you bastards, this is about screwing with supply and demand. Okay, so I got an essential lesson that didn't take place in college, through academics, but at the time I was going to college. Now, I remembered that. And the reason I'm saying that is because people put the pressure on themselves because they allow themselves to be manipulated into believing. And let's put it this way. If I'm going to have friends, and that friendship's based on the things I have and how big and expensive they are, then, man, I don't want you as a friend. This ain't happening. And I've done this my whole life. But, I mean, what happened with me is when I saw that they did that, back when, I've only bought like 2 new vehicles my whole life. They've all been 4 cylinders. I said, the scumbags did it once, they're going to do it again. And what do you know? Back in the mid-'80s, they started to upsize all the vehicles, said they were bigger gas hogs than they were in the days before.
I've heard you talk about this before.
Sure.
It's very true, very interesting, yeah.
Yeah, and then I'm saying, what are you guys nuts? Don't you know? Well, here we are. Now everybody's crying with their SUVs, and their gigantic pickup trucks, and I'm like, hey, idiot. What do you really need, and what do you want? So, I mean, that's a very banal example, but that's where my wife and I are at. Our biggest thing is to stay out of debt, keep the necessities. I guess in a sense we hold them as the real pleasures in life.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
It keeps all that heat off us.
Independence, a free attitude, and personal integrity are things that will stand you in very good stead for anything that comes, anything at all. And I am a very spiritual person, and I believe that our soul is infinite and is indestructible, and we must be as big and as cool as we can about understanding that the things that come before us, in a sense, we are witnessing something incredible.
Yes.
And if we can manage to have the fortune and the faith to, live through it with some sort of, determined attitude and some sort of respect for ourselves and those around us, then I think it's doable. So it is coming. There's no question about that. It's not a reversible process. And whether you're reading, the Old Testament or Buddhist tracts or New Age, stuff. There is truth and there is vision in all those things, some more than others. But certainly if you spent more time reading the Bible this year than ever before, you may be pleased to hear, because there is extremely accurate information in there. And, there are parallels between pretty much everything in there and everything that is going to come. And as soon as you can understand some of the metaphor and, separate what is metaphor and what is literal, which are not always what you would imagine they are. Some of the things that you would hope are not literal, unfortunately, are. Then I think that, you can get a guide from that. So, as a youth, I would have discarded that book a long time ago. But actually, its value in terms of morality and, prophecy and, common sense and wisdom is pretty high, actually. I think it's a valuable book, and I think people who are not Christians and don't think that way should nevertheless investigate that, because there is a path through that book to something that's quite significant. I know, obviously, you would think, yeah, that's right.
I know. I didn't solicit that, so I appreciate you saying that.
But I'm just speaking to other people who may not be a Christian. I am not a Christian. I'm not anything. I'm just a human, trying to kind of figure out what's going on. And I will take whatever path has the best information and feels the truest, and it's not all about information. Sometimes it's about intuition, and something is real, and something has value. When it comes into your life, you can sense it, and it needn't necessarily be facts and figures. We do tend to feel that we exist in this, scientific dictatorship, this technocracy. Science is not the arbiter of truth. Science measures things. That's all. It doesn't it doesn't give us value for things. It doesn't explain things on the macro level, only a micro level. So science has no answers for me. It just describes things. I would rather go to a philosopher or a priest or a monk for actual wisdom and real information. So, we must choose our sources of information carefully and, begin to switch off the TV and stuff. The internet is the only valuable source of information out there at the moment. So, as I said earlier, it's a good idea to archive some of that off and make sure you've got local copies of it, because it would be nice to think that on, a single CD you can take away, 500 high-value books with you. You go to the next day and say, well, how are you going to power your PC up if the electricity's off? They are selling solar-powered thingies on on Amazon.
Yeah.
So for those intrepid explorers who want to take laptops with them, you can buy a little device that will power your machine if you want to just read stuff and, light the screen up and look at things. Then you get into the realms of survivalism, which is, as far as I'm concerned, is largely fear-based on the internet. So that's the aspect of conspiracy theory I don't like, which is, it's all going to hit the fan and grab your gun. That's not a path forward. That's a path to surefire sort of, digging a hole in the ground and peeking out when it's all over. It's not a route forward. Definitely not.
One thing I like to bring up, too, and that is what's happening, even despite political machinations globally or financial machinations globally, and that is, I read this the other day because it's a quote I just think says tons. Unfortunately, I think the one who espoused this also knew the plan, but still what he said is really, I think, a prime truth, and that is, and this comes from Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis, who said in one decision, he said, I guess the most treasured right for Americans is I guess speaking obviously parochially to us, and that is the right to be left alone. That is coming to an end, and everybody's got to have been sensing that, even forget what they're trying to do legislatively. Think about all the privacy you've lost, all the control you've invited into your life. And again, as you know, over here too, I think you have even more draconian measures. With the video cameras everywhere.
The surveillance is crazy here, absolutely incredible. And I in my work, which is unfortunately unrelated to my thinking, so while I was only left today, I go out and earn a crust, as we say over here. I travel around a little bit, and whenever I go into the cities, our big sort of three cities are Manchester, Birmingham, and London, sort of north to south, that is, and up near where I am, near Manchester. Even in this city, which by US standards is quite moderate in size, it's not a big one, but it's impossible to move around the city without being surveilled and observed. And everything you do is tracked. And there are some systems being put up, which started off in Edinburgh, Glasgow, which are now being brought to Manchester, whereby as you enter the city, the optical character recognition cameras figure out your plate, so they know that Neil Kramer has entered Manchester, and here he is in his car, and he arrived at 4:20 a.m. and he left at 5:30 a.m. What's he doing there at this time of night? Okay, let's check his records. What's he been doing? Where does he work? How much does he earn? Where does he live? What's he doing? What's this phone call that was made? So it's very, very simple for them to pluck that information out. It's not Orwellian here. It's day-to-day reality, So if anybody's seen the film A Scanner Darkly with Keanu Reeves in it, another film with a very bad actor, which is incredibly good, like The Matrix. But in A Scanner Darkly, which is a Philip K. Dick interpretation of one of his stories, the point of the film is that everything is constantly under surveillance, and everybody is part of that surveillance, and everybody contributes to it. So some of the characters are actually working against each other, although they seem to be friends and live together. And it's this kind of ethos where surveillance becomes, kind of slotted quite nicely into your life to make things better and to protect you. And, you know, an area of non-surveillance is actually a bad thing, you know, and that kind of philosophy is desperate to try and promote that. So whenever we hear of some little old lady who's been, you know, knifed or worse, or whenever we hear of some kids who've been, you know, setting a building on fire, the subheader is always, this was all picked up on CCTV cameras and police were quick to respond. So, you know, anybody who is in a fearful state, who is not thinking clearly and who doesn't understand what's going on, will think surveillance is good. So that is the meme that is being translated in these articles. So, very scary, yeah. It's getting a bit strange over here, so you just have to laugh about it. Otherwise, you know, the alternative is that sometimes I do dream about going around with a sledgehammer and just knocking them all off in the middle of the night, but there's quite a lot of them.
I know, and I'm thinking to myself with the other things, the supposed oxymorons that you find in Orwell's 1984 about war is peace and all this, you know, freedom is slavery. Yeah. The other thing I'm thinking about is surveillance is privacy.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that's a very neat way of explaining it. Yeah.
Yeah, the things that they make people swallow is amazing.
It is incredible, and you know, key to that is this fearful anxiety. So if you consume news, you consume fear. And the only way to counter that is to actually know that that's not really what's going on. So you then can consume news without fear. But, you know, people who I value very highly and, you know, members of my family and stuff, just like everybody else, you know, they don't get this and, you know, maybe they're starting to get it. They do talk about it without me prompting them. You know, I don't go around and kind of, you know, go off on one. I reserve that for your show, Viz.
Yeah, thanks.
But, you know, I do care about these people. I don't want them to be suckered and I don't want them to be hurt. So, you know, there are points where I will turn them in a certain direction as you know, harmoniously, incredibly as I can to say, well, that doesn't necessarily mean that, you know, what that newscaster just said is true. You know, she's reading something that someone's given her that, you know, came from somewhere else, from a news agency. And who wrote that and what does that mean? You know, where's the reference? What does it actually represent? So just questioning things is a good start. You know, is a good place to begin.
Just let me throw this out to you before, because I mean, it's not unlikely we're going to have a chance to do this again. Yeah. But one of the things I've been thinking about is what happens. See, there's two things happening right now, and they'll happen again next year, as they do most of the time, and that is you're dealing with two things. The pre-Christmas hype by the media to go out and buy a lot of stuff. And you also have the thing about, you know, candidates and breath of fresh air and, you know, this guy's going to do this or this woman's going to do that. Yeah. And what cracks me up, and when people get mad at me, as they did in this one particular news email group, I'm like, you know, what are you getting down on me for telling you that Ron Paul is just another politician? And I look back and I had written on one of them, I go, look, Republicans essentially throughout the century have always pushed wanting to limit big government and spending and reduce taxes. Democrats have usually said we need affordable health care. Now, here we are. You know, I've been
exactly the same over here with Conservative and Labour, by the way.
And I've now witnessed. I don't know. The first election I was ever somewhat aware of was the 1960 presidential election, which was stolen for Kennedy over Nixon. And I've been watching ever since. And then at this time in my life, I look back and I ask these people, what's changed? Government keeps growing. Taxes keep going up no matter what they tell you because there's a shell game that's played with that, and we still don't have affordable health care. What do you think is going to change?
Fairy tale retold over and over.
Now, the Christmas shtick is even better. This one is good. They start right now. Today's Black Friday, they call it. Stores open up in the dark, and people just go flying in. And you know, it's almost like a post-soccer brawl, okay? Or football brawl, I should say, over in the UK.
That's laughable, yeah.
Yeah, and what cracks me up is they'll get them out there. They've already put the messages out about, well, you know, the merchandisers they're kind of hip now. Do you hold them back? You better go in there and buy it because they're lean and mean on the inventory. So if you want that little toy, you better go out and get it now. Now, here's what happens. Come March 1st, out comes the hangover. Well, 1,000 million Americans are in debt, you know, more than ever before. And so it's like, well, what did you do? You induce them to go out to buy. You I shouldn't call them idiots because they're not the idiots. I mean, that's the media. You induce them to buy, and then you hit them in the head with a hammer after they've gone out and done it, and now are deeper in debt, and freaking out even further. And this goes on every year, Neil. And I'm looking at this, and I'm like, oh, God,
It's the same con. It's the same long con. Go out and buy stuff because you need it, and there's not much of it, so you need to get it. And then once they've spent the money and they know they're not going to get spent for a little while, right, turn up the fear dial. Okay, they're all back home, they're not spending. Turn the fear dial up, put it up to max. Let's freak them out, What's the guy called who comes on and talks about his publication, The International Forecaster?
Oh, Bob Chapman.
Yeah, Bob Chapman, he's a great guy. I really, really like listening to his stuff. Very funny, very human, a really, really nice guy. He gives a lot of good advice on this stuff. And he says, if you insist on investing, think about doing it in precious metals. Personally, I wouldn't, but if I was investing, that's what I'd do it in. Don't get into debt. If you're in debt, get out of debt.
Mm-hmm.
Try and put a little bit away so you've got as many months as you can if you didn't have to or you couldn't work. And, he lays down these things now and again. They're very, very wise words, and he's basically, putting forward the notion of financial independence on a sort of practical level, but also on a philosophical level. Debt is not a tool to be used, for you. It's a tool that is used on you. So although people may appreciate that, the control of debt is not just the money that you're in the red with. It's the money that it's the whole concept behind it, which is I need more money, I need more, I need to do this, I need to do that, I need to consolidate, I need to go further. It's as one guy said, money is an evil spell, that has been put upon us for many centuries. It's a spell, it's an illusion, it doesn't exist. And we're getting to the point now where as less and less cash circulates, certainly here in the UK, if you're buying anything other than a sort of six-pack of beer or a bag of crisps or whatever, or chips as you call them, you don't use cash. You use plastic, and all that stuff is just it's just fake. It's just illusory numbers somewhere. It doesn't really represent anything. It doesn't have any reference. As a whole other subject, but there's no reference point of anything with any value to the promise that you have on a piece of paper, regardless of whether it's cash or not, so there is nothing there. It doesn't represent anything. So, to me, that is a spell. It has no substance, but it has an effect, and that's what a spell is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's funny when you talk about credit cards and the fact that most exchanges and transactions are nothing more than electronic bytes and stuff.
Yeah.
Isn't it interesting that they also use the word charge when you're using a credit card, because that's all it really is just, getting the electrons flowing again. So in the banking business.
Yeah.
All right, Neil, listen, the Blogspot, folks, is the Cleaver.blogspot.com. Hey, it was good to get you back again, and I know that you'll be dropping in at least by an email. I'll be hearing from you, along.
Definitely, yeah. Thank you very much for giving me this platform to speak on, and I hope it's been interesting, and I hope we speak again soon.
Yeah, and if you don't mind, there'll be some other shows that would run in the same vein as mine did, and if it's okay with you down the road, think about giving those people an hour or so if you can.
Yep, that'd be no problem at all. I'd very much like to do that.
All right, you take care of yourself.